Thank you, Mr. President. Esteemed colleagues in the Senate, Secretary Sonny Dominguez, Secretary Ben Diokno, colleagues in government, I humbly rise to present to you the 2018 General Appropriations Bill under Senate Committee on Finance Report number 167. This is an honor I am truly mindful about and for which I am deeply appreciative, for it is you, my distinguished colleagues, who reposed on this humble representation the trust to sponsor for the last 3 years this most important piece of legislation that we, as a collegial and independent institution, have to enact into law. It is for this reason that, as chairperson of the Senate Committee on Finance, I am happy to report to you that our task mandated by Section 24, Article 6 of the Constitution, and I quote, which is to propose or concur with amendments as regards the national budget for fiscal year 2018, is almost complete. It is now ready for plenary discussion and the approval of our colleagues. But before I go to the heart of the matter, please allow this representation to put into context the diligence, the passion, the very hard work, if you may, that your Committee on Finance has poured into 48 budget hearings, 10 technical working group meetings, numerous budget briefings up to yesterday late afternoon, and a comprehensive discussion at the Development Budget Coordinating Committee, or DBCC, level to assemble the 2018 national budget that I am about to present. Mr. President, there is one real and poignant encounter during one of the public hearings on the 2018 national budget. It happened last September 14, when the Executive Director of the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, I think she's the chair, Leonor Oralde Quintayo, waxed emotional when your committee, upon the motions of Senators Juan Miguel Zubiri and Sherwin Gatchalian, approved the restoration of the NCIP's budget, which the House of Representatives had reduced to only 1,000 pesos, together with the budget of an important constitutional body, the Commission on Human Rights. The significance of the moment was not lost to the NCIP officials, because during the hearing, members of your committee took turns in chastising them for the apparent lack of seriousness in their work. This representation herself rebuked the agency for its monumental failure, not only in defending the rights of our 14 million indigenous peoples, but also in promoting indigenous culture and knowledge. An agency, I said, that does not have the drive and the passion to preserve IP culture and heritage needs a rap in the head to wake it up from the stupor. This was what the House of Representatives did by defunding the NCIP. Still fresh in my mind was a seemingly unabated and yet unsolved killings of Lumad leaders allegedly by paramilitary forces years ago. I can remember a few of them, like Emerito Samarca, head teacher of an award-winning Lumad school in Lianga, Surigao del Sur, and Dionel Campos and Juvelo Sinzo. These, as well as many other crimes buried and forgotten as statistics, are as repugnant as the admission by the NCIP top official that the incidence of poverty in the country remains high among IPs. As to what extent, the NCIP did not say, but if we juxtapose the IP situation vis-a-vis the 21.9 million Filipinos who were considered poor in 2015, then what I just related speaks about the whole story of the 2018 General Appropriations Bill and its supreme importance and primacy to our national life. The 2018 General Appropriations Bill is a national expenditure program touted by the administration of President Rodrigo Roa Duterte to bring about inequality-reducing transformation, or pagbabago. A budget seeking to enhance the social fabric, or malasakit. One that will increase a country's growth potential, or patuloy na pag-uunlad, and an expenditure program that seeks to maintain the foundations for sustainable development. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, it is against these benchmarks that your committee examined the 2018 GAB. However, the overriding constant that guided us in proposing refinements in the national budget proposal touches the very core of the question. And I ask, will this budget affect real change among those who genuinely need the government's preferential care and support? The 21.9 million poor Filipinos are farmers, fisher folks, children, self-employed and unpaid family workers, women, youth, migrant and formal sector workers, senior citizens, the differently abled, the urban residents who are unaffected by and oblivious to the rhetoric, the bureaucratic turf battle sometimes, the corruption, and the fake news breaking every single day. These basic sectors may not even know that the 3.767 trillion pesos the government is asking the Senate and the House to enact into a law is actually a deficit budget, meaning that disbursements to support this budget will total 3.364 trillion pesos, part of it, or 523.568 billion pesos, will be financed by borrowings, of which 80% will come from local sources and 20% from international lenders. They may not even know, but will undoubtedly worry if they do, that the bulk, or 84% of the total disbursements will be sourced from both tax and non-tax revenues amounting to 2.841 trillion pesos. And what of the poor? Will they, as we do, rage righteously that the Bureau of Customs, which had lately sunk lower than low in credibility, is to collect only 637.1 billion pesos in 2018, plus or minus the 165.5 billion pesos in tariff revenues, to be lost due to smuggling? Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the serious work your committee invested in fine-tuning the 2018 General Appropriations Bill has resulted in a budget that considered the wishes of the executive branch, yet reflective of what we, who, like the President, have a national constituency, feel daily as we keep in touch with the pulse of the people. This pulse beats no farther than the steel gates of this Senate, where every single day, even during weekends, hundreds, if not thousands, of our fellow Filipinos from the lowest strata of society line up to avail of, nay, beg for, whatever assistance is available from the offices of the members of this hallowed institution. A stark reality, that is, the legislative branch of government being a refuge of the poor, because some, just some, agencies in the bureaucracy are sometimes perceived to be insensitive or unreachable, or sometimes failing to attend to their needs. We want to help address the challenges that hinder agencies from fully utilizing their budget. Dahil sa pondo na binabalik sa kaban ng bayan, katumbas noon ang mga classroom na hindi na ipapatayo, mga kalsadang hindi na simulan o nabuo, mga batang hindi nabigyan ng sapat na nutrisyon, mga pamilyang patuloy na naninirahan sa kalsada, mga komunidad na walang ilaw at tubig, at iba pang mga proyektong hindi na ipapatupad. Faced with this grimmest of these realities, your committee thus fashioned a budget that we believe will translate the soaring rhetoric of our leaders into something really solid, into something firmly rooted on the ground that our people can hold on to and hope. It is a budget that reforms and transforms, to borrow the President's message. It is also a budget trimmed of the lavish, and therefore unneeded decorative furniture in a house meant for 104.9 million, but which unfortunately accommodates only a few. It means a budget that addresses the basics, It is a budget where we made room and space to keep those who are in the cold warm, to feed those who are hungry and dispossessed. A budget that reduces enmity and restores the peace. A budget that is transparent. Such a budget, your committee believes, will bring the Filipino family tranquility, prosperity, and unity. We believe it should ignite hope, which is a dwindling currency in these pessimistic times. We also believe it is a crucial tool to finally break the cycle of intergenerational poverty and to promote inclusive economic growth for all Filipinos. To reduce inequality, we at the committee level supported many of the proposals of the President and the budget refinements proposed by our colleagues in the lower house. But we also made sure those are aligned with the results of the Senate's own consultations, the public hearings that we conducted. That is the public pulse. I begin with the environment and climate change, a lifelong advocacy, and my public record shows that. Your committee made certain that a 2018 GAB ensures ecological integrity, clean and healthy environment, risk-sensitive investments, disaster preparedness, through special provisions that integrate and mainstream disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation and mitigation in government programs. We at the committee firmly believe that building an inclusive and prosperous economy requires us to continually strengthen our resilience to impacts of natural hazards and climate change. If you recall, Mr. President, we embedded the Quick Response Fund all in the budget of the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Fund in 2017, only earmarking those that were meant for the agencies. In this 2018 GAB, we reverted, as practical logic dictates and per the request of all agencies, to an arrangement that we instituted in the 2016 GAA, where the QRF is lodged in individual agencies to ensure easier, quicker access and utilization when the need arises. Thus, your committee transferred 1.250 billion pesos from the NDREAM Fund to the DSWD, 1 billion pesos to the Department of Agriculture and the DPWH, 750 million pesos to the AFP, 500 million pesos each to the DOH, OCD, and NIA, 100 million pesos to the DOE's NEA. We also allocated 2 billion pesos QRF to the Department of Education, 500 million pesos of which is from the NDREAM. We support the executive branch proposal to provide 1.5 billion pesos for the Pag-asa Modernization Program, 1.5 billion for the MMDA Flood Control Program, 285 million to the Mines and Geosciences Bureau, the DNR, for geohazard mapping and assessment. We agree that these resources are directly needed to strengthen our community's adaptive capacities against climate change. To further underscore this need, we require under this 2018 GAB every local government unit under the responsibility of a DILG to conduct regular and evacuation drills in coastal communities that are at risk of storm surges and landslides. These drills should simulate real emergencies, should teach our people basic survival skills, how to avoid panic, as well as help them ascertain proper responses during actual natural hazards. On the main, while the House realigned funds from other agencies to come up with 40 billion pesos for Republic Act 10931, the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Act, which the President signed last August 4, your committee further allocated 10 million pesos in capital outlay for each of the country's 112 state universities and colleges, simply for the reason that free college tuition alone does not make education accessible. School facilities, classrooms, laboratories, equipment, efficient and well-trained teaching personnel do. And to support enrollment in science, technology, engineering, agri-fisheries, and mathematics STEAM courses, which is now noticeable, we have realigned 327 million pesos within the budget of the DICT for free Wi-Fi for all SUCs. global interconnectivity should extend from the homes to the schools, then on to the workplaces. For basic education, we've increased the chalk allowance for teachers from 2,500 pesos to 3,500 pesos, all amounting to 770 million pesos to sustain the increases we started in 2015. Our instruction to the Department of Budget and Management and DepEd is to please, if possible, release this allowance before the start of classes in 2018. We continue to support the efforts of the DepEd for the conservation and preservation of all remaining Gabaldon-type school buildings and other similar heritage sites, as well as its site development plans. In the 2018 budget, we've allocated the amounts of 1 billion pesos and 435 million pesos, respectively, for each of these priorities. The budget we fashioned out is a budget of continuity and sustainability. In 2017, we overwhelmingly supported PhilHealth with additional 3 billion pesos so that all Filipinos, even the 8 million nameless, faceless, vulnerable, marginalized population, can be covered by the government's point-of-care program. We are providing PhilHealth the same amount for 2018. We ask PhilHealth to please aggressively inform the needy of our country of this health subsidy. Also in 2017, we set aside 2 billion pesos in irrigation fee subsidy so that the National Irrigation Administration will no longer collect irrigation fees from our poor farmers. We earmarked the same amount for the same priority in the 2018 budget. My hope is that next year, when the NIA comes back to report to us the use of the money, it will tell us that the 34.3% poverty among our farmers, the poorest among the basic sectors, would have been significantly reduced. In this budget for next year, we reflected our continuing effort to reduce the inequality that victimizes the poor by setting aside 2 billion pesos for the repair, rehabilitation, and construction of additional DSWD centers nationwide. This amount became available after the DSWD's own internal housekeeping, which saw it realign its 1 billion pesos from its Sustainable Livelihood Program and another 1 billion pesos added by the committee. This is unprecedented, Mr. President, in terms of capital outlay for the DSWD. After the repair, rehabilitation, and construction are done, we expect the department to make available at these centers the services of a respectable shelter, access to water and electricity, working toilets, beds, proper ventilation, adequate lighting, and other essentials. We expect nothing extravagant, just what is basic and humane. We have to treat our poor with dignity, Mr. President. We continue to support the Conditional Cash Transfer Program by upholding its 89.408 billion pesos allocation, of which 31.68 billion is for rice subsidy. For 2018, an amount of 270 million pesos for the Early Childhood Care and Development Nutrition Package for the first 1,000 days have been set aside under the National Nutrition Council that will benefit children and adults in 16,419 barangays worst hit by malnutrition. This is a timely intervention to address the 31.4% poverty rate among the Philippines' children population, the third highest among the basic sectors. For the second year in a row, we are funding the Centenarians Act by allocating 189.5 million for a one-time cash grant of 100,000 each to 1,895 senior citizens aged 100 years and over. For the surviving spouses of the World War II veterans, your committee has allocated 1.647 billion pesos for the full, not partial, payment of total administrative disability arrears, a shameful ingratitude to those who shed sweat and blood and sacrificed lives so we may live in liberty and freedom. In addition, we set aside 30 million pesos for the construction of a hospital in Mindanao for a dwindling number of veterans. We support the proposition of the President that this budget is one that will increase the country's growth potential, patuloy na pag-unlad. This being so, we followed through our support of 1 billion pesos to the government's Pondo para sa Pagbabago under the Small Business Corp by setting aside the same amount in 2018 to boost the continuous development of MSMEs, which comprise the largest bulk of enterprises in the country. We also added 800 million pesos to the House-approved 200 million pesos for the provision of the shared services facilities. SSFs are development support equipment and systems that will be made available to MSMEs to make them productive and competitive. Of the 1 billion pesos for SSF, 200 million will be for state universities and colleges that implement livelihood initiatives, 100 million pesos for schools of living tradition, 50 million pesos for MSMEs of the Marawi evacuees. We are one with the President and our colleagues in the lower house in batting for increased infrastructure spending to herald the so-called golden age of infrastructure. Aside from stimulating economic activity, estimated at a GDP growth of 7 to 8% in 2018, creating decent jobs expected at 1.6 million annually, attracting more investments, the build, build, build philosophy will ultimately expand to building human capital and inclusive social justice. Thus, we support the budgets of the agencies with hard infrastructure requirements, 30% in total of the 2018 national budget. And as one of the safeguards against waste of public funds, we are writing a new special provision that requires all government agencies with infrastructure projects to post in their official websites the status of such projects, including geotagged photos, contractors' names, project's cost and location, and project start and target date of completion. Speaking of Marawi, we support the move of the House to provide for the rehabilitation of the city, but we were firm in our stand that the budgetary allocation should be increased. Thus, in the light of Marawi City's current situation, we are making available 10 billion pesos from the NDREAM Fund for 2018 for the city's quick recovery, reconstruction, and rehabilitation. This amount is on top of the 5 billion pesos given this year from the Contingent Fund and Fund of Agencies. We are also making available a 500 million peso subsidy for a loan facility for the private sector in Marawi for the evacuees and the residents under the auspices of the Land Bank of the Philippines to enable them to reconstruct their damaged homes. In a new special provision, we specify that such loans will be free of any interest, but the loanable amount is limited to 2 million pesos per household, and the Land Bank may charge the borrower an administrative cost for processing the loan. For the Mindanao State University in the city, we've allocated 5 million for cultural mapping of the intangible and tangible heritage, all memories and materials left by the war that engulfed Marawi. We hope that this process of heritage mapping and its intended outputs can hasten the psychological healing of the affected populace and strengthen our cultural bonds with our fellow Muslim Filipinos. These budgets go with our fervent prayer that we may immediately see hope, dignity, and peace restored in the Islamic city of Marawi. With this small yet meaningful allocation, we signal to all Filipinos that the Senate accords culture and arts an important place in our budget priorities and would not allow culture agencies which provide nourishment to our national soul and identity to be left behind. Thus, your committee provided resources for the promotion and preservation of our tangible and intangible heritage. The message we are sending is that culture and arts literacy is key to national unity. The Marawi crisis brought us constructive lessons in peacemaking and peace building. It also magnified 1,000 times the difficult challenges we face towards socio-economic and political stability. And so, Of course, we do not desire another Marawi crisis somewhere else in our land. Thus, for 2018, we are providing an additional 100 million pesos intelligence fund for the National Intelligence Coordinating Agency, NICA, to ensure that it is ready and equipped in preventing any more Marawi-like crisis from happening. This is on top of the intelligence resources we are allocating the Armed Forces of the Philippines and the PNP, as well as the 36 million pesos and 35 million in confidential funds and the Situation Room funds, respectively, of the National Security Council. Despite the criticisms and the public ire hurled against the PNP, we support its funding needs, because only through this can we really make them more well-equipped, efficient, and effective. Your committee does not subscribe to some wild notion that withholding resources from our police force will make them accountable. It is the PNP leadership under the President who should answer for the action, behavior, and performance of the police corps. Thus, we are allocating 1.9 billion pesos to the PNP in 2018 for it to achieve an improved police-to-population ratio of 1:511. The ideal police-to-population ratio is 1:500. About 10,000 police officer 1 recruits will benefit from this budget. We allocated 900 million pesos to the PNP to support its campaign against illegal drugs, as well as 1.2 billion pesos for the operating requirements of the PDEA. By way of support to PNP operations, we are also providing 100 million pesos for the purchase and installation of closed-circuit TV for the PNP Command Center, which we provided this year, 2017, as well as an initial 50 million pesos for the acquisition of body cameras for police officers in highly urbanized areas. We are setting aside 47.734 million pesos to finance the upkeep of the PNP Women and Children Center. For armed services, your committee has crafted a new provision for the unprogrammed appropriation of 2 billion pesos, which shall be used exclusively to support the requirements of the AFP PNP housing project under Republic Act 7279-7835. Every soldier and police officer, through his or her work, may be on the field and outdoors. They need a shelter to go home to, as much as we citizens do. Your committee has increased from 2,000 to 4,000 pesos a month the hazard pay for the men and women of the National Bureau of Investigation, or 13.536 million pesos, knowing the risks that they take in performing their duties and responsibilities. For the Philippine Coast Guard, we provided an additional 120 million pesos for the installation of buoys in Coast Guard stations nationwide to ensure safety at sea, especially in the eastern seaboard facing Philippine Rise. While seemingly minuscule in amount, this action is part of our efforts to secure Philippine Rise and signals to the world, particularly to our neighbors in Asia, that we have the political will to assert the integrity and our sovereignty over Philippine territory. Likewise, your committee has allocated 8.2 million for the hazard pay of Department of Foreign Affairs employees in hardship posts, which are increasing in number given the very volatile socio-economic and political situation in many parts of the globe that has engendered problems like terrorism and transnational crimes and disease. Our diplomatic personnel should be well protected as they respond to the challenges of their official representation of the Philippines as an active member of the international community. To ensure a more efficient judicial system, we are providing additional 426 million for the Sandigan Bayan for next year. The amount is inclusive of a 10 million peso rewards fund for whistleblowers. In this budget, the Supreme Court gets an increase of 100 million, the Court of Tax Appeals and Court of Appeals 2 million each. The following constitutional offices also get their fair share in the form of increases in their 2018 budgets. Civil Service Commission, 71.8750 million. Commission on Audit, 40 million. Commission on Human Rights, 156.432 million on top of its restored budget. Office of the Ombudsman, 143.653 million pesos, specifically for the implementation of the electronic filing of the Statement of Assets, or SAL-N, of government officials and employees, worth 16.653 million pesos, and for its building, 127 million. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I could not have completed the serious but fulfilling and productive task of fine-tuning the 2018 General Appropriations Bill without the esteemed company of our very hard-working vice chairpersons, Senators Sani Angara, Bam Aquino, J.V. Ejercito, Ping Lacson, and Cynthia Villar, to whom this representation is sincerely thankful and grateful, not only for their meticulous employ of their own fine-tooth combs in asking the relevant questions on the budget, but also for their diligence and wit. I should not miss to mention all of our distinguished colleagues who have participated in our public hearings, both in the majority and the minority. All of you here in the chamber have surely enriched our discussions, and you deserve our people's commendation. I could not do it without you. The Filipino people are awaiting with nervous anticipation and hope the translation of the outcomes of the Duterte administration's budgetary proposal into meaningful, tangible, and real-life affecting reforms, as well as real and solid benefits, yung nararamdaman ng pinakamahihirap na Pilipino. As chairperson of your Committee on Finance, I myself am getting very impatient for results and watching closely how things will change for the better for our people. This must actually be fast and sooner, I often tell myself. Yet, as elected senators, duty dictates that we, as members of a collegial institution, must show the way in so-called drinking tea from an empty cup, the highest degree of patience, as Confucius himself taught. This is what we do in a democracy. We adhere to certain rules, processes, and systems in our work to prevent disorder, if not chaos. And this adherence to rules, processes, and systems applies to our work in the national budget. We must propose or concur with amendments as the Constitution instructs us. That is why today, on behalf of your Committee on Finance, I propose for the Senate's approval of and concurrence with the 2018 General Appropriations Bill, as thus presented under Senate Committee on Finance Report 167, programmed new appropriations, 2,786,187,550,000 pesos, and program appropriations, 75,340,000,000 pesos. Total new appropriations, 2,861,527,550,000 pesos. Mr. President, I now make myself available to answer any question from the distinguished members of this chamber. Once again, salamat po.